Welcome to part 11 of half bath to full bath. I'm How To Bob, and we're going to start out in this part by doing some more drywall. I've got the piece in the hallway outside, cover up the vent, and I've got my marks on the ceiling where the studs are, so I know where to put the screws for the drywall once the drywall's on the wall. So I can just go ahead and put my screws in every 12 inches or so is a good rule of thumb. Could be more, could be less. And then I'm just going to start filling in other pieces. Got this one that's going to overlap a little bit. Once I get it hung, I'll come back and cut the piece off from the other side using my oscillating tool. Just cut all the way through, and then I can cut the top section and use my utility knife and score the remaining side, and then it should swing right open like a door, and cut the paper on the opposite side, and voila, that panel is removed. Now I still have this little piece up here that needs to be cut, small piece. Use my oscillating tool, cut that off, and it fits right in, and I can screw that in the rest of the way, countersinking my heads. This one's a little tight up here, so I'll use the 2x4 to push it into place, and then resume screwing all of my pieces in. Tighten this one up a little bit. Staying out in the hall, I'm going to use this tall piece here to put over top of this external wall, and it's a tight fit as well, so I'll get my block of wood and hammer it into place. Get it tight up against the other pieces of drywall and up against the studs. And let me just tap it over a little bit, and you can see it fits in there really tight. And I've got my marks on the wall where my studs are, so I can screw in the drywall. Once I get it started, I like to put a line on the wall sometimes just to make it easier to know exactly where my studs are. I'm going to start on the ceiling again, patching up the little pieces that are missing. Got this one cut from the wall that we removed in a previous part, and it fit right in there, so I'll just screw that up into the pieces of wood that I have behind here. And then I'll put some screws in the adjoining drywall just to keep it from flexing. Now I've got one inside the bathroom, and I'm going to mark my outlet. I had to turn the electric off for this again. And I'll use my rotozip tool, punch a little hole in here, and I can feel where the box is. Once I find out exactly where it is, I can cut the outlet. I put the outlet down below. I put the actual wires down below the box to keep from cutting them. Once I get the top of the hole cut, I'll put the wires at the top and then slide my drywall back over into place. Then I can cut the bottom of the outlet hole using my rotozip, and I can follow the same procedure for my switches on the other side here. I'm going to cut just half the hole because I know where my wires are. I've got them tucked out of the way. And then I can push them up and cut the remainder of the hole when I know where the wires are. Let me just pull them through the hole, and I should still be able to cut the rest of the hole with the wires out of the way. It's a little bit more difficult once the switches have been wired up and the outlets have been wired up, but there's ways to work around it. So those lined up good. Now I've got a vent here, and I got the measurements, so I'll mark the center of where the vent goes, and you can see I stick my hand in here to know exactly where the vent is, and then I just outline the vent with my rotozip. Let me cut a bigger section off here so I can verify where I am okay. Now I can resume cutting, cut all the way around, and there's my cutout for my vent. Screw that piece in. I'm going to move over to the next piece just behind where the vanity is, and this doesn't fit quite right, so I'm going to buzz off a little bit and tap the bottom in. Now I've got a big gap in between, but I'll fill that in with paper and mud. As long as I use the paper and the mud, it should be no problem. So now I'm going to do the piece where the double switch is in the kitchen, and I marked the height of the outlet. Now I'm going to do the distance from the wall, take my measurement from the wall, transfer that over to the piece of drywall, and I'll draw a little hash mark there, top and bottom, and then I can transfer that over with my speed square or rafter square, and then draw a straight line up, and I'll have the outline of where I need to cut the hole for the outlet, and I'll use my oscillating tool. And once I get my hole cut for my switches, I'll need to remove the switches and slide the hole around it. Looks like it's a little bit too small. I'll just buzz that down just a little bit, and then I can fit that over top and start to screw in my piece. Okay, once I get my piece screwed in, I can get my knife and score the back side along the 2x4 all the way down, and then swing the piece over. And it looks like it's getting caught on the ceiling, so I'll have to cut that part that ripped. But normally I would just cut that straight down, but I can clean this up. I'm gonna have a corner bead going around there, so this is really not the end of the world. Now I can put my switches back in and start on the opposite side. I took my switch out already, and I'm going to put this piece in the bottom here first, and then I'm going to come back in with my piece that I have to cut the switch out for. So I'll mark it the same way, mark my top and bottom of the box, and then measure the distance from the corner to the box and the corner to the other side of the box. Transfer that over to the piece that needs cut and draw my lines accordingly, and then I can draw my vertical lines, and I'll have my cutout marked. Use my oscillating tool to cut on the lines. And then I can slide my piece over all the way. I'm going to mark my studs first so I know where to screw. Then I can slide my piece over against the corner all the way over, and looks like it's a good fit, so I can start putting my screws in and screw in the outlet, and then finish up with the rest of the screws. And I have a little piece hanging over, so I'll buzz that off. Little pieces are hard to cut with the knife, so I'll use the oscillating tool sometimes for that. All right, next is the end cap. I'm going to put that on just using a very few screws because my corner bead will have a lot of screws in it, and that'll help hold the drywall into place. So I really didn't need a bunch of screws in, just the cap. Now I had to cut this corner bead just a little bit because it was slightly too long. I cut it at an angle. It makes it fit up against the ceiling a little bit better. And I just slide it in to place and start screwing. You can see I dimple those a little bit, and that's good because mud will go in there and fill that area. So it doesn't matter how much you dimple it as long as you don't crease the corner of the corner bead. Once I'm done with my corner, I'll go back into the bathroom, and there's a piece that I need to put on above the door. And you can see on the ceiling I've got my stud locations marked, so I know where to put my screws. And then I have another piece to put on behind the door. Screw that into place. And then I've got the interesting piece of filling in where the light used to be. So I've traced it out with the old electrical box because that'll be the exact size of the hole. And once I get it traced out, I'm going to use a jab saw or a drywall saw to cut it close to the angle. It doesn't have to be exact, but the better fit, the less mud I need to use and the less work it'll take. And I got this piece here. I'll just cut the back side of the paper, and I'll have my circular piece here that should fit right in. So to get started putting the piece in, I'm going to take a small scrap of wood. I've got a screw partially screwed in to hold it into place, and I'll just screw that in through the drywall and hold it in place. Now I've got 2 pieces of wood. I can put my piece of drywall in and screw that in, countersink the pieces, and I've got a patch made. So now I'm going to start using 90-minute mud. This mud starts to set up in 90 minutes. Gives me a good base to start, and then I can get a second coat on it within 90 minutes or so. So I've got my tape cut to the size, put a nice bed of mortar down along the joint, and I like to get my paper tape wet and wring it out a little bit. It seems to flow into the mud better for me that way. And I lay it right across the seam, press it into the mortar bed with the knife, cut off the excess here, and then I can smooth it out a few times, put a little extra mud on there to embed the tape into the indent of the drywall. So now I'm going to cut my tape for the corner where the wall meets the ceiling, and I'm going to lay out a bed of mud on both the ceiling and the wall and spread it out so that it's not so thick, kind of thin. And I'll bend my tape in half. It's creased in the center. Put the corner right in, and I've got a corner knife here that pushes the tape in the corner real well, and then I just come back with my 4-inch knife and go across, covering the edge of the tape. And I don't like to build it up too much. It gives it a rounded look that way. I like a nice crisp, clean corner. Then I can start filling in my corner bead here. Corner bead sticking out a little bit further in the corner, and that gives me an area for the mud to set and give it a nice feathered out finish. Once I get done, I'll come back with another coat, wipe off the corner, and I can do the other side of this corner bead all the way up to the ceiling. I'll clean off the corners as I go so I don't leave all the pieces of mud hanging off the corner. There we go. And we got a nice smooth edge for our first coat. Now I want to go down the edge here, and I just use my knife and scrape it along the 2 corner beads. And if it runs short on mud, I just put a little bit more on and then start dragging my knife down, cleaning off the edge again. And I go all the way down with that. Now on the ceiling where it was finished, what I'm going to do here, I'm kind of pulling out some of the drywall on the finished part, and that allows me to get a bed for the mortar. It gives it a little indentation because this part of the wall is a little thicker than the rest. And you can see I've went around the whole border of the ceiling where it meets the finished wall. And that's just going to give me a place to put my mortar so that it's not a big bulge once I get finished. So once I get all that part done and scraped out, I'm basically taking the paper off of the drywall, and I'll replace it with my paper tape. But when I get done with that, I'm going to go and put a bed of mortar in the area that I just removed so that I can use my tape to fill in the crack, and that will also allow me to fill up the indentation that I just created, giving me a nice smooth transition from the old ceiling that's already finished to the new ceiling that is not finished. I'll have to texture that, and that'll be coming up in the next part. Starting to come together now. We'll get a coat of mud on it here all the way around. Same thing here. Put the tape up. I like to get it wet. It does stick a little bit better when it gets wet, and it makes it easier to embed it in the mud bed that I've created, and just keep going over it until it's smooth. Doesn't need to be real thick. I found that a thinner coat is a whole lot easier to deal with once it's dry than putting on a thick coat and having to sand it down over and over. So I like to go with a thinner coat of mud each time. Okay, so I'm just going to go around and smooth out all of my joints. Make sure everything's got a good coat on it, not too thick. And we'll let that dry. And while that's drying, I'll start working on the drain. I've got it all plumbed up, and what I'm going to do before I take it apart is mark where the fittings go. That way when I put it back together, I'll know exactly where it is, and I can take it down, glue it, and then put it back in place. I found a better way that this fits, so I'm going to use this little piece here instead of the longer piece, and it'll fit a little bit tighter. So I'll mark this piece here before I take everything apart, and then I can glue everything. And once I get it all glued, I'll glue the drain in the shower and then my hookup point into the house plumbing, and then the piece that I have glued together, and I can glue it into place, give it a little twist, hold it there for a moment, and I've got my drain hooked up. So things are starting to come together now. Check back with us on part 12 of half bath to full bath. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that bell icon while you're down there as well to get all the updates. And I'm How To Bob. And as always, thanks for watching.